back. Well, it should be Tuesday, and we're talking about chapter 9, geometry. And yesterday were talking about prerequisite skills. For instance, we looked about how that the perimeter of a rectangle is perimeter equals 2 times the length plus 2 times the width. And we talked about ordered pair and coordinates, and you did that lesson, prerequisite skills. Now today, we're on 9.1. 9.1 is called Introduction to Geometry. You know, geometry was my favorite math. I don't know if I told you that yet. My favorite math in high school. And I think it's because I like to draw, or I like to have things kind of drawn out for me as an illustration. And geometry does a lot of that. So I think you'll enjoy it too. All right, so here we are. First off, in our introduction to geometry, I want you to know that I teach from a Christian point of view. In other words, I believe the Bible, and I believe what it says about how we got here and who God is. And our math book is not a Christian book. So don't look in your math book for what I'm about to say. But I'm going to tie in some of the key basic vocabulary that you need to know for geometry. I'm going to tie that in with also a Christian point of view of things. All right, first off, we're going to talk about in geometry they have what's called a line. Now, lines they have no beginning and they have no ending. A line goes forever and ever in both directions. Now, this would be called line AB. Now, you notice that we use capital letters when we name points in geometry. We use lowercase letters as variables when we're doing algebra. But in geometry, we're using capital letters to name the points. So this could be called line AB. And you write this symbol above those letters. That means everybody knows you're talking about a line AB. But you could also call it line BA. All right? So line BA or line AB. You know, a line reminds me of God. When I think of God, I think of someone who has no beginning and no ending. God has no beginning, has no ending. If anybody tells me, how do you know there is a God? How can anything not have a beginning or an ending? Well, then I just say, well, isn't that one of the basic things about geometry? A line with no beginning and no ending. So I think that reminds me of God. I'm not saying it is God, but it just reminds me. He has no beginning. He has no ending. Also in geometry, you need to know what's called a ray. Now, a ray has a beginning, but no ending. So the place that the ray begins is called the end point. That sounds funny, doesn't it? It looks like the beginning point, I know. But they call that the end point. And then here I've named it by going through another point. And so I would call this ray CD. Now you notice the symbol is different. Over the letters I have a different kind of symbol. And it always points to the right, no matter what direction the ray is pointing on the paper. You always name it with the symbol pointing to the right. So this is called ray CD. Now you cannot call this ray DC. No, it can't be. Because when you name a ray, it only has one name. It has its name as far as the endpoint goes is always first when you write the letters left to right. So this is ray CD. You know, a ray reminds me of people. Because the Bible says that people are not like God. And in some ways we are. We go on forever and ever. Nobody, every person that's born has in a sense, a soul that will live forever. And a body that will live forever. And a spirit that will live forever. But the difference is, for people, we have a beginning point. All people have a place that we began. We're not God. We're not the same as God. But we're similar in the sense that we have no place that we will end. And so that array reminds me of people. The next thing that we need to know in our introduction to geometry, besides a line, array, we also have what's called a segment. Now some people call them line segments, but we'll just call them segments in our geometry time. So a segment is it has endpoints, 2 endpoints. So every segment has 2 endpoints. And you can name it, and you notice I have over above it here, not a line, not a ray, but I just have that. And that segment over EF names this. This is segment EF. Or you could call it segment FE. So it could have 2 names. And segments remind me of animals. Yes, animals. Animals. I love animals. Especially the ones that are good to eat. You know, the fact is that animals, here we have this segment, animals have a beginning, but they don't have any eternal, immortal soul or spirit. They have an ending too. So make it as pleasant as possible, all right, for them? Now, when it comes to segment, they remind me of animals. A ray reminds me of people. A beginning, but no ending. And a line reminds me of God. No beginning, no ending. All right, we have another important introductory to geometry figure that I want you to learn. It's called a point. Now, a point is simply what looks like a dot, but we don't call it a dot in geometry. We call it a point. And so you label points with capital letters, as I already said. This would be read as point G. This would be read as segment EF. This would be read as ray CD. And this would be line AB. All right. So there are a couple other things about geometry that's important to know. When you hear them talk about a plane in geometry, they are not talking about a plane that flies around. What they mean by plane here is a flat surface. Now, for instance, this board is a good illustration of what a plane is. It's a flat surface. The walls, floors, those things form flat surfaces. They're a good illustration of what a plane is. But in geometry, a plane goes forever and ever in all directions as far as the flat surface goes. In other words, I can just draw it like this, but you have to imagine it would go forever and ever in all directions as a flat surface. So that's called a plane. Now, within the plane, you can draw lines that will either be parallel to each other or they will intersect each other. That's the only choices. If I draw two lines in a plane, in the same plane, the rule is either they will never touch, and that's called parallel. And when they're parallel, we put these arrows in red, and we'll do that in our geometry work as you do practice and those things. If you want to tell me two lines never meet, you put these arrows in red somewhere on the line. So I would look at this and say, no, the drawer is trying to tell us these lines are parallel by those two red marks. So make sure you use red when you do those. Or if you have two lines on a plane, remember a flat surface, they could either be parallel or they will eventually intersect. In other words, if they are not parallel, they eventually will meet if they're on the same plane. Now, so intersecting lines intersect at one point. And I call this the point that these two lines are intersecting, point C, where the lines intersect. Now you notice I didn't draw red arrows on these two lines because they are not parallel. They are intersecting lines. And that just means parallel lines. Okay, so, hey, let me remind you, just a break here before we go on, make sure that you have two items, this for geometry. First off, a protractor, and secondly, a compass. If you haven't gotten those yet, you'll need them. In fact, I would tell you the next lesson, you need a protractor. So for tomorrow's lesson, make sure you have one of these handy, a protractor. Now back to introduction to geometry. Here I've drawn this figure here, and I want you to see if you could just do this part with me. Let's name 3 points on that figure. Go ahead, name one. Name another. Name another. Now you notice that there are more than 3. Any of these capital letters are designating points on these figures. So we can say point A, point B, point C, point D, point E. But you would just write them as capital letters. There are 3 of them. Let's name 2 rays on this figure. And most of the time, 6th graders, when we get to this, they look at the figure and they say, there are no rays there. There's no place where it starts and then goes off like a ray from the sun does that you have pictured up here. But you see, I can make them rays. For instance, if I started at point D and I went up forever and ever through C, through B, I've just made a ray out of that. So as long as I call it what it is, I'm going to name 2 rays. I'm going to call this ray C, let me start at D, ray D, B. All right. I could have called it ray DC, but I start here and I go that way. So that's a ray. Can you find another one? There are many that you could have. Okay, name one. Another ray, and this figure here. Great, let me write one. I'm going to start at D again, and I'll go through E forever and ever that way. So I'm going to call it ray D, E. All right, next, it says name a segment that has E as an endpoint. So here's E, and you're saying, well, all these have arrows at the end. There are no segments. Well, actually, I can make it a segment if I just give it the name segment. So what if I start at E and I go to A? Could I call that a segment in between E and A? Here's segment EA. Now, if I put arrows on that, I wouldn't have the right answer because I'd be calling it a line EA. No, I'm only talking about this between E and A. Right there is a segment. And so I would call it segment EA. All right. And you could do segment ED or segment EC. All right, those will all work too. What's another name for segment AE? Start at A, go to E. What's another name for it? Okay, how about this? You can call segments two names. You can say, starting here, I'm going to E, or you can start at E and go back to A. So segment EA is another name for that. How about this? Name a pair of parallel lines. Okay, so I'm going to give names to these lines, and there are two lines that are parallel. Can you tell which ones are parallel? What have I done to let you know that they're parallel? Well, I drew those arrows, correct? So I would say line AB and line DE are parallel. Now, could I call that line BA? Yes. And this line ED? Yes. You won't miss it if you're changing the letters when you have a line or when you have a segment. That's okay. Just don't do that with array. All right, how about this? Name a pair of parallel lines. How about name two pairs of intersecting lines? Well, these are lines that simply meet. I have, can you name them first before I write them up there? Just give me a pair of intersecting lines. Say it out loud. All right, let's see if you got it. Same thing I got. I have, first off, I have to put the symbol line. AE, I see, is intersecting. AE intersects AB. Now, there are other answers, but that's just an example of things that you're going to be asked to do in the practice today on your own. When you do those, you're going to run into things like this, and I'm just kind of helping you out with that. Well, that is just an introduction to our geometry class. First off, a line reminds me of whom? God, because it has no beginning or no ending. Array reminds me of what? People. Why? Well, because it has a beginning, but no what? Ending. A segment reminds me of animals. Why? Well, it has a beginning and an ending. I'm sorry if that's heartbreaking to you, but that's the way I believe it is. All right, a point, by the way, reminds me of plants. They just are. Well, will you do the practice tonight or today? And as you do that practice, make sure you message me. Ask me questions. I love to help you. Thank you. Sayonara, y'all.